Affirmative action is a government or private program designed to redress historic injustices against specific groups by making special efforts to provide members of these groups with access to educational and employment opportunities. I like this definition because it also explains why affirmative action exists, to redress historic injustices, which means discrimination. The key aspect of affirmative action is that it provides special access to opportunities, usually in education and employment, to members of groups that have been discriminated against. Now, where affirmative action gets controversial is when you look at the two ideas of access and opportunity. When you poll Americans, they generally favor equality of opportunity, although they usually don't like it when the government tries to promote equality of outcomes, usually by redistributing wealth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This means that Americans generally think that other Americans should have an equal shot at success, even though they don't imagine that all Americans will be equally successful. Not all of us can be Donald Trump, although not all of us want to be. Since we tend to believe in the USA that education and jobs are the keys to success, equality of opportunity is tied up in access to these two things, and that's why they are the focus of affirmative action efforts. Here's where it gets tricky. In order to increase access to education and job opportunities for members of groups that are historically discriminated against, affirmative action programs try to ensure that they get extra special access to jobs and schools, which to many people is not equality of opportunity. Legal types often will use the metaphor of a thumb on the scale to describe the added benefits that affirmative action programs supposedly provide. But we could also see it as a head start in a foot race.
In 1896, the Supreme Court upheld the cornerstone segregationist doctrine of separate but equal in Plessy v. Ferguson. This ruling stated that the Constitution permitted the government to require the separation of races in schools, public transportation, and elsewhere, so long as the opportunities offered to the separate races were characterized as equal. In 1954, after nearly 60 years, the ruling of separate but equal was overturned, the Brown v. Board of Education. The Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This case started an epidemic of desegregation and equality for all. Affirmative action was first supposed to be a way to further the spread of equality. It is a practice of improving the employment and educational opportunities of members of minority groups and women. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson stated that, "You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say you are free to compete with all the others, and still just believe that you've been completely fair." He believed that by potentially giving more opportunities to those who had been previously oppressed, such as women and minorities, that there would be complete equality, forgetting that by doing so, they would be unbalancing the tables of equality once again. The long-standing debate over affirmative action's constitutionality has existed nearly since its inception. This is not due to any other reasons besides the fact that it goes against the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment by providing more opportunities to those of minority groups and women. Recent cases regarding affirmative action and how it violates our rights as American citizens. The most prominent cases being the Supreme Court cases of Gov't v. Bollinger in 2003 and Fisher v. University of Texas at Austin in 2013 and late 2015. The question being asked in Gov't was, does the University of Michigan's use of racial preferences in undergraduate admissions violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment? The court acknowledged that the use of race in the University of Michigan's undergraduate equal opportunity program was not narrowly tailored to achieve the university's asserted interest in diversity, but decided to uphold the use of affirmative action in admissions purely on the precedent of the value of a diverse student body. In Fisher, the question was quite similar. Does the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment permit the consideration of race in undergraduate admissions decisions? In response to this in 2013, the Supreme Court answered with a 7-1 majority that the consideration of race in admissions is necessary to achieve the benefits of diversity, and that the process is precisely tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest. Though they did not specifically address the issue regarding the constitutionality, they did send it back to the lower courts for review. The 2015 case of Fisher, that is still pending a ruling, has the unanswered question of, Does the University of Texas's use of race as a consideration in the admissions process violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment? The ruling is expected before this term ends in late June or early July, and no doubt there will be many.
The University of Texas acknowledges that it gives preferential treatment to African Americans and Hispanics, but argues its admissions policy is narrowly tailored to serve the compelling interest of conferring the educational benefits of diversity.
What she is claiming, and what the school does not deny, is that they allowed at least some 200 other people who also did not meet their traditional cutoff, but they were allowed in, and it appears that it was primarily a function of the fact that they were a minority. In America, it was wrong for the University of Texas to say blacks couldn't attend, and it's also wrong for the University of Texas to say blacks may attend and do so at the expense.
As applicants, simply being born black or Hispanic gives you points for achievement, even if your parents are wealthy bankers. Being born white or Asian gets you zip. It's similar at Harvard, which is being sued in another case. In defense, Harvard says, when choosing among academically qualified applicants, colleges need freedom and flexibility to consider each person's unique background.
We just can't have a system, where our public officials are sorting people according to their skin color.
But the Center for Equal Opportunity says that's exactly what's happening. The study focused on high school grades and class rank and college admission test scores and determined minorities were being admitted even when their rankings and scores were far lower.
We found gaps in the average SAT scores, between 110 and 160, gaps in ACT scores that were even greater.
In fact, Clegg says the study shows for mid-range students with identical scores and class rankings, blacks had a 70% chance of being admitted at OSU, while whites had a 33% chance. The study also concluded those given preferential treatment were far less likely to graduate.
It shows that this kind of discrimination really is not good for anybody.
Ohio State is, after all, a land-grant university. And if the board of directors decides that it wants to give preferential treatment to minorities so that there is diversity and so that the university reflects the population of the state, what is wrong with that?
Well, of course, it's racial discrimination. And if you want to give special consideration to students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, fine, but you shouldn't assume that because somebody is black, they must be disadvantaged, and because somebody is white, they must be rich.
A Supreme Court case earlier this year with a 6-2 majority that stated that it was constitutional for a state to change their constitution in order to ban the use of affirmative action in college admissions in both universities and public colleges. Michigan was not the only state to ban the use of affirmative action. 7 other states have banned considering race and class in regards to college admissions and applications in both universities and public colleges. There are many differing opinions on the topic of affirmative action.
I think admissions should be solely based on how you do in high school, how well you apply yourself, how well you study.
With affirmative action because of diversity. Colleges should be open-minded to have all kinds of races and people in their schools.
I don't think that a student should be told whether or not they can be accepted to a university based on just race or ethnicity.
I wanted to get in because of my grades, only because I feel like that's the proper way. You're competing for that spot with a million other kids who also want to come to the school based on their academic performance.
Supreme Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas agreed with the bans on considering race in admissions and has previously stated that he watched the destruction caused by the operation of affirmative action policies while he was in college and saw his fellow students fail as a result. Richard Sanders, a law professor at UCLA, documented a survey of selected colleges that stated students who get in based on race and or economic standing tend to earn lower grades and are less likely to graduate. At less demanding colleges, they'd have a better chance to succeed, he stated.
If we make good decisions and we invest in early childhood education, improved K through 12, if we have done what needs to be done to ensure that kids who are qualified to go to college can afford it, that affirmative action becomes a diminishing tool for us to achieve racial equality in this society.
In order for colleges to achieve their diversity goals and for students to truly have a fair chance at getting into college, affirmative action needs to be abolished. To solve this long-standing problem, we need to begin when we do, in our early years of schooling. By improving the academic standards of schools in low-income areas, we will be able to provide better futures for the minorities and increase their chances of getting into college based on merit, how everyone should.